The Garden of Ink and Bones is a podcast about witchcraft, powerful plants, and making magic. I'm Jen of belladonnaandbones.com, and I'll be joined by occult artist Rue of Old Omen. We're witches who like to get our hands dirty. To us, magic is practical, visceral, and bound in blood to the soil and bones of our spiritual allies. It's time to get your hands into the dirt, do the work, make magic, and feel the witchcraft in your bones. Welcome to the Garden of Ink and Bones. Hello everyone, it's Jen here, and we are back with another episode. As always, through winter we can be a little sparse, and the current world situation has made life very challenging in some ways, but with me today, as always, is Rue, and she wants to tell you something.
Hi everyone. So yeah, we've been a bit dormant in winter, but I am now going by, I guess, following suit of Jen, I am going by my name of Sarah.
Yeah, so just a little change there. So it's Jen and Sarah. Yay!
The truth is out.
Yep, we'll be all over the place with that, I can guarantee. So it's late July, and the sun is shining in Melbourne. What's it like up there?
It's pretty cloudy, which is surprising because it's been abnormally warm the last few weeks. Like, you go out, and even yesterday I was out and it feels like mid-spring normally, so everything's all over the shop. My plants have no idea what's going on. I've got things that have been flowering all the way through winter. Things that are normally dormant have still had leaves on them, so I don't think anything knows what's going on here.
Yeah, and it's been the same here. We've only had one decent frost and probably one half frost that didn't sort of make it through the rest of the garden. We're going to talk about winter gardening and anything you should be doing in your garden later on in this episode, just because life is crazy. So, and speaking of life, what have you been up to, Sarah?
Everything and nothing all at once. Yeah, I'm sure everyone is in the same boat of somewhat over COVID at the moment and everything that's going on. We're in this strain, as you know, you're back in lockdown again down there, and we've been pretty fortunate up here until recently. We've now had, Sydney's had a fair few clusters growing, as anyone that's been watching the news. And then on top of it, we've started to have a fair few clusters spreading out closer towards we are. So I'm at the moment trying to get everything done and trying to do as much work as I can before we potentially get shut down a second time. But other than that, I've been working on a few prints that I'm going to have up soon that I'm just gilding the last little bits of them. So they'll be out and about soon, and working on a few personal things that you and I have been working on in the sidelines, and just trying to get ready for the garden too. I just did a massive plant order. I had a bunch come in today, and seeds are constantly coming in the mail every day, and I'm excited to finally have everything waking up again.
Yeah, I've got to I want to place a plant order, but post has been quite unreliable here. It's like sometimes things get through really quickly and then other things do not. So yeah, I'm a bit wary about ordering plants in the post and having them get lost for a month. So that's always a worry there. Yeah, as you said, we're in second lockdown. And to be honest, this one's hard. It's really tiresome. It feels like the first one was that happy fun holiday, you know. Like, it wasn't, and I know it wasn't, but you know, it was you know, it was enjoyable. We all did some craft, and we did. No, I'm not saying that everyone did. I know a lot of people suffered financially and with the isolation, but you know, from my personal point of view, I was already unemployed, so I didn't have that. I just got on and did stuff, and this time around, I'm finding it a lot more draining on the soul. Like, it's just a lot more. And I think people people down here have been really reckless. And even, family, and you're watching your family and you're like, how can you be so stupid? Like, just because, and when we weren't on lockdown, it was like, just because we're out of like stage 3, it doesn't mean that you can start giving everyone hugs and kisses and hanging out together and stuff. Like, I don't understand how people can sort of not see that. But so that's why I think this one's more stressful, because you really feel like people didn't get it in the middle.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, once, everyone got out of lockdown that first time, everyone was sort of almost celebrating, thinking, oh, yeah, the worst of it's over, and just completely sort of trashed the rules. But then the other thing, too, is like that first wave, a lot of those cases were people returning from overseas. And so it was a lot more contained in a sense. Whereas now you've actually got community transmission, which seems so much harder to actually sort of get a hold of and grapple with. So, like, watching the news of what you guys are going through there, it's pretty terrifying seeing your numbers every day that are coming up.
They've been ridiculous. And we had 6 deaths last night. And it's like, or yesterday, and I don't know whether that's our highest number of people who have died, but it feels very high. Usually it's been 1 or 2. There's outbreaks in all of these meat packing plants and things like that, which seems just really, I don't know, foreign to me, that these places where they should be wearing PPE all the time, like, how are they having such high transmission rates? But it's just, it's tiring. Everyone's tired of it, and it's becoming our new normal. And it's, I think everyone's tempers are starting to get a bit frayed, and depression is sinking in for a lot of people. And I think all we can do is try to find focus and solace in other things. Like, I've tried to sort of divorce myself a little bit from some of the news, because I just was getting so, not anxious, I don't really have anxiety things, but just, depressed by it.
Yeah, I think I've been in that boat for ages. I think news in general is pretty bloody depressing, especially the last sort of 4 to 5 years. But I've gotten to that point, I think, with you as well, where I've just gone, okay, I need to sort of just, ignorance is bliss, of just removing myself from it, because I feel like when you're being pummeled with it every day and having that thing constantly reinforcing to you what's going on, it's pretty draining.
Yeah, and I do think that part of that is the media news cycle is constantly looking for scandal and outrage to get us to click on things. It's just, like, it's really hilarious. But my Google News bullshit page that pops up on my phone all the time is, there's always something like, oh, outrageous packing error with Woolworths. It's like, shit happens. Like, why are we being outraged by this? Calm the fuck down, people. So, and that's it. We're just looking for reasons to make all these hormones and chemicals in our bodies race and work really hard, which is just not good for us. We get this, like, adrenal fatigue happening from the fact that we're bombarded by all of this outrage and shock and horrible things happening in the world. And then we become numb to it and we ignore it, and then that's bad. Like, you've got to find a happy medium, and somehow we've got to find a way to shield ourselves, be it magically and mundanely, from this stuff, without losing empathy for others and perspective on reality.
Absolutely. Totally agree with
And that was my rant. Wow.
Good rant. I think it's what everyone sort of had on their minds. So,
yeah. So my tea for today is lemon balm and a sprig of Roman wormwood in there. So obviously the wormwood's making me quite verbose, and the lemon balm is making me a little happier. So our book for today is interesting. It is the first time we've touched on a Daniel Schulke book. He's German. You pronounce that however you like. I don't care. And it is probably one of his most available books right now. I think they did a re-release, Veneficium, Magic, Witchcraft, and the Poison Path. What do we have to say about this book, Sarah?
So yeah, this book choice it's funny because this was one of the books that since we started the podcast, I'm like, I want to do this one, I want to do this one, I want to do this one. It's one of those ones that I've had in my collection for ages. And I read it when I got it years ago and really loved it. And I've decided I'll go back through it, refresh myself, take notes. And I forgot just how much I don't know how to word it, but it just, especially the first few chapters, just pummels you with information and like it's amazingly well researched. Like how well he researches this entire book is absolutely phenomenal. And I think for people that are taking the poison path quite seriously and have a really invested interest in it, I think this is definitely a good one to have on your shelves to be able to go through. But you're going to be stopping every 5 seconds on each page and taking notes and looking up old works that he somehow managed to dig out and collect everything together. And it's also, but then like you and I were having a conversation earlier about it, as much as I love this book, it doesn't sometimes flow the easiest as other works to sort of read.
Yeah, it's opaque. At times it's overly pompous in places. And you're right, you have to go back to the original works because I don't always think that he communicates the information from those works in a way that can be used. He'll reference it and like tease you with it, but you have to go back to those works and look at the chemicals and things that he talks about because he's not handing it to you on a spoon.
Absolutely. I feel like going back through this book the second time, it wound up meaning that I then went off and bought like another 8 books while just reading this going, oh, because this text seems interesting and I want to know more about this thing that he talks about. And then the amount of plants and seeds that I wound up at the end of this book too, because I was like, oh, that's an interesting one that I haven't heard of, I don't have in the collection. So it's a good one for making you want to learn more about this. But like you said, he doesn't spoon feed you. He doesn't sit down and say, okay, this, and this is what you do and this is what you need. It's just these little glimmers of text from amazing sources that then you go, wait a minute, now he's onto something else. So I want to know more about this. I got to go back and dig up these old texts.
Yeah, and I think we've discussed before that his writing is the first half of the book, first 70 pages, I would say, are just they're the barrier to, they're the price of entry. They're the barrier to entry there. If you can't get through them and feel like you have some understanding of what has been discussed and why it's been discussed and taken the time to do the research to understand it, then you don't deserve the second half of the book. Like, is what he's saying. Because, you know, most people read books front to back. Like, we're pretty Western and linear thinking animals. And most people will get to, like, the second, third book chapter of this and be like, what is he talking about? Like, you know, the very first chapter and the very first paragraph is typical Schulke word salad, and it is, I'll read it for you all. The path envenomed, the writhing host of worm and snake, the venoms of spider, scorpion and toad, and the corrupt seeds and nectars of curseworts, all comprise the mythic pharmacopoeia of the witch. Such are the constituents of the cauldron in its sinistral guise, which, together with the hearth fire, itself seethe in the very midst of the Sabbats around. Okay, I get it, but seriously, it is like, I don't have time to read poetry all the time. But I do love these books, and I love Viridarium Undris, which is even worse in terms of being very flowery. But you're exactly right. It's full of gems, and it's very, he's very opinionated. He has moments where he says, "You can't do this without this," and he has a strong lineage of traditional witchcraft. When I say lineage of traditional witchcraft, I don't mean he's a family was witches going back to whatever. I mean that he's part of the cult of Sabbatai and Andrew Chumbley's sort of crew, and they have some very set beliefs and things. So that's what I mean there. What did you, from the first half of the book, what caught your eye?
That's a big question. I think the main thing that sort of really appealed to me about that first big chunk of the book was just how well read and how well versed he was in really digging out old texts from a bunch of different cultures. Like, there's this, let me just grab it real quick. Like, there was this one particular passage that just really, I think, explains, and it's sort of like that one you read before, of just how much he jumps from different culture to different culture and is managing to like pin together how all these things tie together with poison and how it's been used everywhere. But self-poisoning for the attainment of mystical knowledge, ecstasy, and congress with spirits we call the poison path. This designation separates the mystical endeavour of transmutation from the vulgar dose of hedonism or criminal activity. Ours, therefore, is an art of subtle discrimination, of observation and caution. Gnosis of the poison path arises not from the first matter of its toxin, nor its mundane somatic effects, but in its transmutation via the magical art to serve the path of the seeker. This art is thus the holy dominion of Shiva Vishpan, or of Shiva, the poison drinker, emblemized, imbibing venoms from a conch, and whose blue skin color resulted from its ingestion. Is in Lamech lore, it's the dominion of the Euphir, or hell's physician, possessing the secret lore of medicines and dead bodies, akin to the shadowings in the burglaring, vampire, or vapin, and also the Turkish upa, or sorcerer. Among the great tributaries of ancient magical knowledge reaching the present, certain forms of traditional witchcraft reckon the fruit of Eden's tree as a dispensation of Semel or Lucifer unto mortal kind, and a so-called fallen angel. The intelligence is us, the herald of witchems, dawn emissary of light, to transgress the first tenebration, thou shalt not eat, so on and so on. But the fact that, like, I feel like this was one of those books when I very first read it where he even goes into a bunch of Buddhist beliefs and everything else that really made me dip into a bunch of cultures that I'd never really look at in a deeper sort of way, or ones that I wouldn't have even thought would have had much to do with the poison path, but do, and sort of how they sort of linked with different cultures. Like, he made a comparison in one of his chapters about a balm that was being made in South America, which had a bunch of different poisonous plants and insects and snakes and all those sorts of things, and then a comparison to what we were finding with the balms being made in European witchcraft. And I just found it fascinating that he must be that well versed to be able to be going through all these different historical texts from different cultures. So that was definitely, I think, my main interest in those first few chapters, because anthropology has just always been something I'm fascinated by. So he did that well.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that you get from the first part of the book is this is not. It's really funny because it's a direct quote from a Dale Pendell book is "Let's get fucked up," but he is not about that, and Schulke is not about that. And while some of his dosing is in some of his other books is heroic, like seriously heroic dosing, he doesn't really push that in this book, and he does talk about the fact that we're not here to just get fucked up. We're here to explore the relationship with the plant, and sometimes in minute doses. And yes, sometimes we're looking for those psychostasis that and things that we can achieve through the toxicity of the plant, but it's not its sole purpose, right? I think that, and he's always talking about the plant. He says that you can't know the toxic parts of the plant without knowing the healing parts of the plant. There's no healing, there's no poison without an antidote. There's no, you can't just go, I'm going to be an expert on psychoactives. You have to learn about plants that heal so that you are rounded.
Absolutely. And that's something that it sort of ties back into conversations we've had in previous episodes as well, where sometimes you'll find these people when they're talking about poisonous plants and there's a lot of fear mongering based around it. And it's almost like, oh my God, don't touch them. They're evil, blah, blah, blah. Whereas I like that he does point that out. And in this book, I feel like he gives you a really good perspective of having a healthy respect for these plants. But exactly as you said, and that's something that I did really appreciate in his works, is how he speaks about a lot of these plants and how they can be used in healing ways as well as poisonous ways, how that plant has that diversity within it that I think a lot of other people completely overlook those properties of it. But then he's also, there was one particular part where he spoke about his own personal experience of hemlock poisoning. And he does it in a really nice way where it's sort of not this whole, be afraid of it, avoid it, it's evil, blah, blah, blah. But he is at least honest in the dangers of it as well at the same time. And it's sort of an approach with your own respect and risk of this. So conine ingested orally in small doses or rubbed into the skin can produce a sensation of gliding through the air, which you should all know is hemlock, which, one of your favorites there, Jen. My own experience of accidental transdermal poisoning in contexts unrelated to magical incense confirms this to some degree. The dominant sensation was acute physical constriction combined with lightheadedness, vertigo, and in seeming an increased sensitivity to light. Removed to an area of darkness and quietude, a sensation of lateral undulated flotation was noted, several inches above the ground attended. This may be crudely described as lying supine on the conveyor belt, which has a small amount of rise and fall as it waves on a body of water. The sensation in no way ecstatic, and indeed was pervaded by the constant and tenebrous fear of death. If transdermal absorption of flesh or plant alkaloids may be considered entheogenic, burning the plant is another matter. Conine is unstable alkaloid and begins to break down soon after the plant is harvested. Dried leaves and roots contain almost no conine. The alkaloids are somewhat more stable in the seed, and these have been harvested for incense usage in magical circles which have participated. In this particular case, it should be noted that the suffumigants were initially not meant to be consciousness altering. Rather, the seed of hemlock was incorporated for their planetary resonance, usually that of Saturn. Mixed with other ingredients of sweeter and more buoyant character, hemlock did not dominate the mixture's aromatic or energetics. But I like the fact that he was at least honest to say that, this is the effect I got, but I also had this overwhelming fear of death. So beware.
Yeah. Yeah, I love having hemlock to grow. I will often use it once it's been dried if I'm going to add it to anything, because I know how strong the conines are, and it's basically it's just one of those things you don't want an accidental poisoning from hemlock because it's not pleasant. And that in general that's how I feel about most daturas as well, because I don't resonate very well with them. But I think there is a lived experience, and I mean, for lived experience, I do recommend the Dale Pendle books, which are way harder to read in their own way, but way easier to get nuggets of strong information from. But yeah, I think that the Pendle books are like a podcast series unto themselves. Like you can't just talk about them in one podcast. then you get to the chapters about the matter of man and the witch's supper, which are off-putting for the modern mind, using the parts of the body in things, and then the consumption of the flesh of the dead, and those things are just stuff, as you said earlier, that we just look at and go, I would never do that. Like, and it's not squeamishness. It's just that modern sensibilities have moved on from some of this. But the interesting thing is, and this is what he does say, that there is. Here we go. I'll read this little bit to you. In the case of historical folk magic, formulae of opposition are often transgressive against law, religious orthodoxy, or social convention, but above all against self. As exacted, they often make use of the inversion. Now, he's talking about something that you find or have in past lives, found holy, saying the Lord's Prayer backwards, drinking blood of any type, or consuming any part of the animal that you may not normally consume. If you're part of most modern people, offal is not a common food for people. Like, there are people around who eat different bits of offal, but things like consuming the heart of a bird, which is easily gotten if you buy a quail and you bone it. They always leave the hearts in. If you that sort of thing, it's transgressive against our modern sensibilities. And that's really important to look at that. We're not saying go out and dig up a corpse and eat its heart, or anything gross like that, but to push yourself to do that sort of thing it's part of what makes it magic. Like, if you're the type of person that would never eat anything raw, eat something raw. If you're it's that sort of thinking that can add potency and commitment to some levels of magic, and not all of them. You don't have to do it all the time, but yeah, I think. And then he talks about how, as witches, we're generally not too afraid of using our own urine, or our menstrual fluids, or semen, or vaginal secretions, or stuff like that. So, and he's saying that, spells employing such secreted matter are transgressive of ancient dietary laws, wherein food and the feast itself represents a sacrosanct compact between the dining parties. So if you're putting those things, even in minute or inert levels, into food so that you can enchant others, then you're again creating that transgressive act, because you're violating that guest covenant when you feed someone that you're not going to poison them. And you may not be going to poison them. We're not putting poison in food. We're binding them, or doing other magics, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that was a interesting chapter, as much as I probably would never have any use for it. And again, he had some like great references to, like, I think there was at one point he pointed out the fact that during the plague, corpses were in abundance, so people made use of them where they could a bit more.
Yeah, and it has the traditional references to things like breads contaminated with ergot and other funguses that cause, well, potentially death, but are thought to maybe be the cause of what we think of as werewolves, because they cause foaming at the mouth and sort of wild rabies-like tendencies.
Oh, that's always
Um,
been one of my favorite things in history is the fact that because of ergo, we have not only white bread, but we also have LSD. And it's such a strange part of history, if I can just ramble for a minute for anyone interested. So, like during, I think it was like the 17th century in France, like we used to make all of our bread on rye grain instead of like wheat wasn't a common thing yet. And we had this one big, cold, long period of a winter where there was a mass amount of rye bread that was contaminated by ergo, which is a black mold. And as you
mhm.
said, ergo poisoning is absolutely horrific. Pretty much, it sends you mad. There's supposed visions of werewolves. It's real animalistic, and then you eventually die of it. And so you've got this massive part of France that's suddenly all going through ergo poisoning. And so that's when they realized that, okay, we don't want this to happen again. So they figured out that wheat grain doesn't grow mold the same way that rye grain does. So that's why we made that transition into white bread. But then on top of it, so it was Albert Hoffman who sort of came across formulating LSD. So he was synthesizing that ergo mold, had it in a vial, had it sitting on a shelf for ages. One day I accidentally dropped it, got it all over himself. And it was, that was sort of the first experience of LSD, went on, the mystical bicycle tour. And yeah, that's so because of ergo, we have werewolves and LSD and white bread.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Simply brilliant.
Such a strange time in history. But then I mean as well, something that like then there's that other fascination with the whole werewolf thing. You then go through a lot of those really old texts and reports of people of that time, but then there's a lot of people talking about, seeing a man in a black cloak on a horse giving out wolf pelts and then people turning into wolves and murdering people. So it's like, who knows what was really going on?
Yeah, exactly. Um, the most after the center of the book, we reach page 103 and the chapter on infernal vapors, and we probably come to the most useful, technically useful part of the book. If you don't buy the book for all of the other stuff and you get a little bit put off, this part of the book is, I would say, almost required reading for anyone who wants to make magical incenses with plants from the poison path.
Absolutely. I sort of wish we'd referenced this one a bit more when we did one of our last episodes on henbane, because he's got a few
Mm.
really great old texts that talk about the use of henbane incenses and using them spiritually. And he's got a really good amount of texts as well of a lot of like Agrippa's old works and a few other bits and pieces. Like this whole chapter just led me down a rabbit hole of buying 1,000 different books that I wish I'd already had in my collection.
Yeah, it's terrible. It is really terrible. um, the There are so many good recipes in this chapter. There are so many good references, to even talking about wild cherry wood being used to drive away difficult spirits. Um, I love cherry wood as a burning. Like if you're going to smoke things, like you can smoke food with it, but it's just also really interesting because it contains cyanide and prussic acid in the leaves and the kernels of the plant, but they're not. I mean, it's not like enough cyanide to be a problem when you're smoking food with it, but it's interesting that these things um, still get used in food as well as having those qualities.
And I think that's sort of the interesting thing that I've always found with especially traditional witchcraft is the fact that a lot of the things that we use, they have a practical sense for the exact same reason as well. Like, we use salt to drive away evil. And when you think about what salt does, it doesn't allow bacteria to grow or form. So we salt our meat to stop it from going rancid. Or, you're cutting sacred herbs and you're using a bronze or a brass scythe. And again, bronze and brass, like copper, is another antibacterial component. So it's interesting that we're sort of using these things in one way, but when you look at it sort of scientifically and its components and what those components do, it also makes sense in a logical, tangible way as to why we might use that, of why you might use the cherry wood.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There's a nice little incense saying that if of coriander, smallage, henbane, and hemlock be made a fume, the spirits will presently come together. Hence, they are called the spirits' herbs.
I have that same
Of
thing circled in my notes.
Yeah, I know. I like it. It's a nice little thing to pull together. I mean, it's really funny. Smallage is like a wild celery, right? And very easily mistaken for hemlock. And yeah, so that's an interesting thing. I often put parsley seeds into my incenses because I like the way that they sort of add an abundance, and they're very Saturnine. But yeah, there's that whole family, you know. And then there's the witch's smoke, the Bavarian Hexenrausch, which is elderberry, henbane, vervain, fern, cannabis, belladonna, poppy seed, mint, rue, tansy, greater celandine, and maidenhair fern. Which is some of these recipes are really long and some of them are short. So, you know, there's just so many good recipes in this section. I just love it.
It's so great. There's and I think we must have just a bunch of the same notes of the ones that are completely taken our eye. There's this whole chapter is just like so Moorish. There's just so many great old recipes, and the fact that he shows you where each of them have come from and everything is just amazing. And one that I really like the fact that he speaks about, which I think is a plant that's sort of overlooked a lot, and it's one that's common in a lot of people's gardens, even though we're sort of all aware of its poisonous history, which is rhododendron.
Oh, yeah.
So
I love rhododendron.
It's great. It's great. And like, it's weird. It's one of those ones that's in a lot of normal gardens and everyone's sort of aware it's poisonous, but they don't really ever think about the history of it and how often it was used. Other ancient incenses used to contact the spirit world possess psychoactive properties. Siberian Tungus shamans burned wild rosemary, Ledum palustre, which is also Rhododendron tomestum, sometimes mixed with juniper for trance induction. The plant was likewise used by the Giljaks, however said, for ocular work. The plant's strong inebriating properties are capable of causing frenzy and deliria. Ledum's used as a traditional trance-inducing and calming incense, which is noted by Fischer Riese in a modern incense formulary, which provides a recipe using the plant compounded with 1 part chopped dried ledum, 4 parts pine bark and resin, half part hops, 1 part juniper berries, and 2 parts frankincense. But the other also interesting thing that he points out in one of his other chapters, which I love that he mentioned it, is that there was an example that occurred in 400 BC when a Greek mercenary army returning via Pontus was poisoned with menemenem, however it's pronounced, a honey whose chief source of pollen was nectar, toxic of rhododendron species. A large number of the soldiers fell unconscious and some perished, 2 of which poisonous species endemic to the area are Rhododendron luteum and R. ponticum. And that's another interesting thing because there's quite a famous area in the Black Sea region near Turkey where there's a hallucinogenic honey, which is called mad honey. And the bees are pollinated rhododendron flowers in that remote mountainside town. So it's such a weird and interesting one that, it can be found in your honeys and it's that potent that you can consume it and accidentally die or have a hallucinogenic experience. But it's also, I think, one that's overlooked in using in incenses as well. But again, like hemlock, with caution.
Yeah, I just hallucinogenic honey is one of my favorite things. I just think that's the fact that it was so poisonous that it killed some of them. I just love that. It's one of my favorite stories to tell mundane people. Watch out for rhododendron, honey. Her.
It always also makes me slightly paranoid about my own beehive and like when I look around the poisonous garden, I'm like, oh God, I hope I don't accidentally have the same sort of occurrence occur of like accidentally killing someone with my honey.
Yeah, somehow I think that there's a mix, and I don't think that's going to be a problem. The one, if you go back to a lot of magical texts, and even I think Cunningham references this, but saying using wormwood to make yourself invisible, and Schulke references it when he says the Sword of Moses, which was a 10th century Hebrew Aramaic book of magic, in which we find the following spell. To walk in the street and not be recognised by anyone, take wormwood, perfumes, and soot, and moke thyself with it, and take the heart of a fox, and say the sword, and go out into the street. Burning the herb wormwood for invisibility is very, very, very common in magical filter down books, which I think is interesting.
Although I did read that and I was like, great, so where am I going to get the heart of a fox? Birds are a little bit easier, but
Yeah, you're probably not going to get the heart of a fox. And, and this is where we become, we either water it down, or we water down the magic, or we look at other things, like I've got some fox fur. Maybe I could felt a heart shape out of the fox fur, if I had to do it that way and make a charm. Maybe that would be
looking at it. Christen it as a fox heart.
Yeah, because I've got fox bone as well, so I could powder the bone and powder that with some wormwood and soot, maybe from burning the bone and the hair, and put that in the center of it. And and that's how I like to formulate spells. I think about, okay, it says to use this. What can I do to take the essence of that and take the work? Like when I say it's a lot of work to create that fox heart. If I have to calcine the hair and bone, then I have to create a soot from it as well, mix it into a pellet that goes inside the felted heart. Then I have to do the felting, which in of itself is quite time consuming. And then on top of that, do the perfumes and the wormwood magic. I'm doing the amount of effort and putting the life into it that is given by sacrificing an animal, in my opinion. So people can debate with me on that in the comments. No, actually don't ever go onto our YouTube comments. My God. But yeah, I think that I'll just jump in there. Thank you to all the people who leave nice comments and send us messages. We really do appreciate it. It helps us be motivated to do this podcast in many ways. But yeah, the people who are on YouTube and you're just weird little shits, you can just
That's just YouTube though. Like, I mean, I can't help but laugh because I feel like it's just the nature of the internet. And it's like I was saying to you one day, of like, there was a time that I got suggested one of the most innocent videos ever. It was something like disabled puppy walks for the first time ever. And still you go into the comments and it's hilarious that people are so like angry about things. And it's like, it's a disabled puppy, guys. Like, come on.
Yeah. So any other favorite parts from the Infernal Vapors?
All of it.
Yeah.
Like, it's
that whole chapter.
I think this book in general, it's just such a wealth and source of information, and it's a really good way to find a lot of really great historical texts that I think sort of get left out in a lot of modern witchcraft books. So I think it's worth everyone's time. And especially if you really do want to take the poison path seriously, I do think that this is a really good one where it gives you that sort of warning with a healthy respect without saying, avoid this clan altogether. but this is a good and honest way of going, well, these are the consequences and you are responsible for your own actions, as well as here is looking at the plant as a whole rather than just going, oh, it's evil and taboo. Well, it has these amazing other properties, like we said. Like, it's a really, really great book that I think is worth a lot of serious practitioners' time.
Yeah, and I think the one thing, while this book is a compendium of references to other works, it isn't what I lovingly term the soup of the soup. It isn't, like I said, a lot of magic books will say to use wormwood for invisibility, but they won't give you the reference back to the Book of Moses. They won't, whereas with this one, you get that referencing and greater detail than you do in perhaps, the magic light kind of books where they just go, yeah, wormwood's used for invisibility, but they don't tell you why or how.
Yep, absolutely.
So, yes, you all need this in your magical library if you are serious about poisonous plants. My opinion is always that you balance it with books like the Encyclopedia of Psychoactive Plants and David Hoffman's Medical Herbalism, so that you have an understanding of the chemicals and the poisonings and things like that. But this is the magical version of those books, I think. And apparently he has a book that I don't know whether it's ever been released, but he has his own encyclopedia that we've all been waiting for 3 or 4 years now. Since we pre-ordered it 3 or 4 years ago. I'm serious. But, eventually he'll release that, hopefully, and we will again have another book. You need this. You need Viridarium umbris for his sort of ritual side of things, but with the plants. And then you need to spend 6 months reading all the Dale Pendle books.
Absolutely.
Speaking of months, it is July, and here in Australia that is the depth of winter, and as such it is time to do some winter gardening. While we've said that the seasons are all a bit screwy, there are still things that you should be doing at this time of year, and we thought we'd touch on those.
So yeah, winter gardening and getting everything ready for spring. So I guess the main things at the moment, I've been chopping everything back that's just about to absolutely explode. And hopefully everyone's been like nurturing those roots, because I think that's a lot of things that people sort of forget about with their gardens is they're like, oh, it's winter, everything's asleep. But you're not thinking about the fact of how much energy those plants are still putting into their root structures for everything to sort of burst forth with spring. So I've been mulching compost, I've been turning soil, I've been putting nitrogen back into the soil, which I've recently gone on this little tangent of and weird obsession with such like an absolutely innocent plant of the butterfly pea plant.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It makes the most beautiful tea that's like this absolutely striking dark blue. You add a little bit of lemon, it turns purple. But the main thing that I love about it is that it dumps a heap of nitrogen back into the soil. So anything you've got that's a really massively hungry plant, and it grows so easy. It's so good to be growing this near those other things without allowing it to take over. It will vine everywhere. But yeah, at the moment, I'm getting all my soil ready. I'm doing all my compost. I'm feeding everything's roots up because everything's already starting to sort of bud and explode and wake up.
Yeah. And same here. Our peach trees are definitely looking like they're going to bud early, which may mean we lose them to frost if we get some late frosts. But, I'll be very careful with frost blankets for those. But, yeah, it's time to prune. It's time to, prune all your citrus, fertilize citruses and fruit trees, and, give everything a cut back. Like my wormwoods really need a cut back. My lemon verbena, give them a good lemon verbena loves a hard cut back. You just have to look for the buds and cut back to the buds although lemon verbena will reshoot from woody stems, so you can do that. Some plants need attention, like your camellias and your azaleas and any of those flowering plants for your aphids. So you may need to, get the hose out, give them all a hard spray with the hose, and, even resort to spraying them with an oil and dish soap mixture if you have to try and kill off some of those sap-sucking plants. All of those hard things, all the things like dead flower stems, and watch out for some plants throw out suckers, like your roses will throw out suckers, and olive trees and things like that, and bay trees will throw out suckers. If you're cultivating for a really strong single plant, it's time to chop those suckers off. So those sort of things are really important now.
Yeah, I'm pretty keen for everything to sort of wake up.
Yeah. Also, if you're the type of person that has lots of bindi eyes and things like that, they'll be really obvious right now. So it's a good time to sort of get the little weed knife out and get those bindi eyes out, because they're not very useful. Because we can find different clovers that have flowers for the plants, for the bees. We don't need to have bindi eyes because they take over and they're not very pleasant.
Yeah, I discovered those yesterday in my front lawn.
Yeah, not fun at all. Pots, it's time to repot things that are dormant. If you have mandrake, now is the time to do your repotting if you're going to.
Very nice. I just
carefully.
repotted mine into a nice tall pot.
Exactly. I just lost one. It was sitting under a drip from the what do we call them? Gutter, and it got too wet. So I had to rescue it. So I've dried what parts of it I could rescue and let the rest go. But also things like licorice, like if you're growing licorice root, then they need repotting now. All of those pots need cleaning up and fertilizing. I have a lot of dead looking pots right now. Everything looks dead because they're the type of plant that goes dormant over winter. And yeah, you just need to give everything a tidy up. Keep the grass out of the plant beds, which I struggle with sometimes here. And prune and just be ready for all of that abundance. I also did my annual throw all the seeds that are expired into the garden, which is kind of hilarious. I just go through the plant seed packs, and if it's expired, I just chuck it into a mass and throw it into the garden and see what comes up. So that's always fun, my irises need dividing, if you've got those. Actually, my irises are probably just past the point where I should have divided them. But I'm not going to divide them again this year. I'll leave it till next year. So if you've got orris root or calamus root or anything like that needs dividing, do that now while they're dormant.
What else have I got going on? Yeah. I think you've sort of covered a bunch of my bases too. Everything at the moment is just being repotted and ready.
Yeah. And it's just it's time to do some maintenance. It's the boring parts. The boring parts. I like it though. It's a satisfaction in cleaning all the weeds out of pots and dressing them with some new soil on top if you're not going to repot, and giving everything a fertilize. Your compost, it's a good time to attack your compost piles and things like that. And I don't and then also things like a lot of people have a lot of black nightshade growing right now. So Solanum nigrum, which actually is in the Veneficium book, he mentions it very early on, which is very rare because most people don't mention Solanum nigrum at all. But yeah, saying using it as a hexing herb, but also that it has its own psychoactive properties while they're not as strong as normal belladonna. The Solanum nigrum and the black nightshade, which a lot of Australians stupidly call belladonna, is abundant right now. So if you want to play around with that, it's a good time to be harvesting the berries and the leaves and the roots.
But then the interesting thing about that too, so I've got a few great little edible weed guides, and I was quite surprised to find that it's also edible, as long as you're identifying it correctly. And it's one of those ones that I don't know, I never thought about. And it always has that weird stigma because everyone always mixes it up with Atropa belladonna, which it's not. But yeah, it's also an edible weed. And another one that's all through the garden that I've been pulling out everywhere, but I never poison because it's also highly nutritious, is chickweed. Like, annoying, but so edible, so good to chuck in your salads.
And chickweed also makes an exceptional nappy rash thing. So you can juice the chickweed and use it for like nappy rash or heat rash and things like that. And, you know, you can stabilize it in the juice in alcohol, or you can juice it and then allow it to evaporate down to a powder and add it to an oil, things like that. So chickweed's a really interesting plant for that sort of thing. And also a great chickweed is a great compost nitrogen fixer, like all your legumes.
I think that's the thing with a lot of our weeds that people would be surprised by, is that a lot of them are useful in a lot of aspects. You know, you've got this concept that it's weed, but it's not. There's a really great little book for anyone interested. It's a tiny little compendium called the Weed Forages Handbook. And it's so great. You'll find pretty much everything growing in your lawn or wherever you don't want it to grow tends to actually be, a lot of the time, edible and surprising and absolutely amazing.
Yeah, there's heaps of them. You know, you've got warrigal greens, you've got purslane, which is really high in, I want to say it's vitamin C. Should look it up, but I'm pretty sure it's vitamin C. And, you know, all of those sort of things, as well as, of course, the nettles, which we've talked about before. Just look around. Actually, dandelions. This time of year is a great time to harvest dandelions in Melbourne. I don't know about other parts of Australia, but there are a lot of dandelions around. Get yourself out there, get the flowers and make some dandelion wine or some dandelion jelly. Bit time consuming, but worth it. And then the leaves and the roots, you know, they're very useful plants. So
I'm in a bit of battle at the moment with dandelions because my horse loves to eat them, but I'm forever like trying to look for the roots, because you can make this amazing, almost like a coffee. You roast it and you grind it up, and it's really, really amazing. So yeah, it's like when we moved to this new place, there was dandelions all through the lawn, and now I'm almost like trying to save some to cultivate them because the horse either wants them or I want them. So it's this forever battle of who gets the dandelions.
Yes, and that's our tip for the week is go and harvest some dandelions. Get the roots. The roots are great. Poppet root, like it's a solid root, size tap root. So if you need to use a root for fixing part of a spell,
your microphone just changed.
I've run out of battery. So we will have to end there, my friends. And I've run out of battery in my microphone, so I apologise for the dodgy audio at the end of this episode. And we will see you soon.
Have a good one, guys.
Thanks. Hi, Jen here. Thanks for listening. If you like the podcast, tell your friends. And if you want to support us further, you can make a small donation via Ko-fi. Visit ko-fi.com/inkandbones to help us pay for our hosting and production fees. Every little bit of support helps us make the podcast better for you and continue to produce content on a regular basis. Thanks so much. The Garden of Ink and Bones podcast is created by Jen of Belladonna and Bones and Rue of Old Omen. You can find both of us on Instagram at Belladonna and Bones, and old_omen. The podcast is edited by Wade Suchadolski. That's wsuchadolski.wixsite.com. And the music is Weeping of the Ocean by Audiosphere and is under license from Jamando. Thanks for listening.